Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Possessed Pixie and today is Friday, so that means it's a Folklore Friday video. Today we're joined by a little girl, Opal. She probably won't sit on my lap for long, but that's okay. So today's Folklore video is centered around mermaids. I'm honestly really excited for today's video because I learned about a lot more mermaids in other cultures, and it's all just so interesting. I think in every video I'm gonna say something is interesting, or that I found it so interesting because it is, and I did. But yes, thank you for joining me today, and I really don't have too much else to say, but let's just get into it. Right, so today we're talking about the folklore of mermaids. And to start off, what is a mermaid? A mermaid is a sea-dwelling creature that is often described as being a beautiful, half-human, half-fish being. Usually, the upper half of the body is of a human, typically a woman, and the bottom half is the kind of body and tail of a fish. The etymology of the word mermaid comes from Old English, and it's the combination of the word mer or mere for of the sea and maid meaning a young girl or woman. Now, beyond the typical identification of a mermaid as this beautiful woman fish creature, there are other merfolk that have a completely different appearance and intentions of that of which we typically know. Most popular interpretations of mermaids describe them as these beautiful womanly sea creatures that are benevolent, but beneath the surface, kind of pun intended, some of these other merfolk kind of roam the seas with little concern for human life, and there are others that lurk around with much more sinister intentions. The earliest tale of the mermaid comes from about 3,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. There was an Assyrian deity named Atargatis who was believed to be a beautiful and extremely powerful goddess of fertility and protecting her community. Her Mesopotamian folktale tells her story of her transformation as she fell in love with a shepherd named Hadad. One day she mistakenly caused Hadad's death due to her divine power, which ended up filling her with despair, grief, and guilt. Atargatis was so overwhelmed with these emotions that she attempted to drown herself to be reunited with Hadad. However, the water was not powerful enough to overcome her and conceal her divine beauty and power, and instead she ended up being transformed into a fish only from the waist down. This transformation of Atargatis was actually believed to really further her powers, specifically in connection to fertility, the moon, and the water. With this being the believed first account of a mermaid, she was then kind of adopted and transformed into the Greek figure Derceto, who is considered to be a relative form of the goddess Aphrodite. Also, because the origins of the mermaid are so early on in history, the folklore and the tale has been continuously adopted and altered throughout various cultures, resulting in an extremely broad and rich history of the folklore of mermaids. We'll get into some of the cultures when we talk about some types specifically, but some cultures describe mermaids as to signify life and fertility within the ocean, and in others, the mermaid embodies the destructive nature of water. luring sailors to their deaths and serving as an omen for storms, unruly seas, and disaster. Also, in this chunk, I do want to note that it is said that any real life accounts of mermaids made by people are people who are intoxicated and have mistaken creatures like dolphins, seals, and manatees for mermaids. And some of the other symbolism or major notions of a mermaid I want to talk about are in sailor folklore. Mermaids typically represent both good fortune and disaster. You know, sailors spent months and years sailing across the sea in very small, isolated groups, so it's not that surprising that there are beliefs and superstitions on figures controlling the unpredictable weather that appeared in nautical stories over the centuries. And I also think that kind of idea relates back to a similarity of how polytheism works and having different gods for different elements and using that as a way to explain natural occurrences. With the sailor folklore and kind of, well, historical traditions, early map makers would use sea monsters and mermaids to be a graphic portrayal of dangerous geographic areas in the oceans. Essentially, places where weather was notoriously bad and ships were known to wreck. Because of the sailor folklore believing a mermaid to either represent good fortune or disaster, mermaids were often and are often appear as figureheads on the front of ships and other kind of nautical vessels. The figurehead, which was popular in the 16th to about the 20th century, is essentially a carved wooden decoration located on the bow of a ship, typically wooden. When I was doing some research, I found some to be made of what looked like brass, but don't quote me on that. A lot of different figurehead decorations had been used, but mermaids became extremely popular as they believed this to appease the sea, as a way to ensure good weather and finding a safe way back to the land. Now that we've talked about origins and symbolism, in the specific types, the symbolism gets a little bit deeper and specific. So let's start talking about types. The first three I'm going to talk about are mainly European centered. And I think at least two of these are probably some of the most well known. And we're going to start off with the siren. The siren is a mermaid-like woman who is described to be bewitchingly beautiful. She sings amongst the sea to lure and take control of sailors, encouraging them to follow her into the sea, which then ultimately results in the siren dragging the sailor to the depths and feasting upon their flesh. Origins of the siren come from Greek mythology, though they looked a little bit different than how we describe them to be now. They were actually, there's a huge ass fly, wow. But they were actually described to be half human, half bird, with the head of a human woman and the body of a bird. The next type we're going to talk about are nixies. Nixies are a Germanic water nymph described to be half human and half fish. Not really in the way a typical mermaid or mer creature is described to be, but the image, it will be somewhere. But nixies are known shapeshifters, and they typically would shapeshift into human women. They typically dwell in underwater palaces, and it's not clear to me if they specifically dwell in the sea or lakes or rivers. It seems like they could be found in both. Nixies kind of are creatures that symbolize certain death. Their main goal is to bewitch men with song and dance, coaxing them into the water, to be ultimately met with no escape. The next type of merfolk are the Selkies. These creatures come from Slavic folklore, and they are said to be the spirits of drowned young women and girls. And they are also sometimes believed to be the souls of unbaptized children. Typically, they appear to be lightly clothed in mist and are wreathed with crowns of sedge. From the images I saw of them, they are more human-like than fish-like, but they're these spirits of the water. Rusalkis live in lakes or crystal palaces in the depths of rivers, and they're not typically considered evil, and they actually perform rituals in the summertime to promote the growth of rye. But should a man choose to join them during their ritual, the man may or may not make it out alive. Moving on, the next type of mermaids come from African and Asian cultures. So the first one we're going to talk about is Mami Wata. This mer creature is described as a mythical water spirit from Western, Southern, and Central Africa. The term Mami Wata refers to water as mother. As I said, this spirit comes from multiple African cultures and actually has ancient roots, but there is no singular way to identify these water spirits. Mami Wata is worshipped for both the benevolence in offering, beauty, healing, and wisdom, and is also a known way of warding off natural disasters. The Mami Wata is relatively good, I would say. No sinister intent behind this one. Also from African folklore are the Jengu. The Jengu are described as mermaid-like figures that live in the rivers and sea. They are described to bring good fortune to those who worship them. The Jengu are believed to cure disease, and they act as intermediaries between the physical world of the living and the spiritual world. Because of the Jengu's associations to curing disease and being intermediaries, there's actually a large cult following behind these figures and people who truly believe in them. The next merfolk we're going to talk about is Suvenamaka. She is a mermaid princess from Southeast Asian folklore, with her name meaning golden fish. Her tale is tied to the Ramayana and the story of Hanuman building a bridge of stones across the sea. In the tale, she fell in love with Hanuman, though their relationship didn't last, but Suvenamaka became a symbol of luck for the community, and she's often depicted on charms, tapestries, and a lot more. Also in Asian folklore come the Ningyo, which essentially means the human fish, and they come from Japanese folklore. The Ningyo are described to be more fish-like than human-like, and they are described to have golden scales with a humanish, monkeyish mouth face situation. It is believed that if the Ningyo is caught, they will bring misfortune and severe storms, and when they are washed ashore, it is said that they are meant to serve as an omen of calamity. Shifting kind of back over to the more European side of things come the Selkies. The Selkies are a Celtic water creature described to be a seal that can transform into a beautiful human, both male and female. The Selkies transform by shedding their seal skin once they come upon land, but in order to be able to return back to their original form of the seal and return to the sea, they must keep their cloak of sealskin that they shed. Selkies are said to be not evil at all, like other European mermaids, mer creatures, but that they're actually very gentle and loving, both to people and their own kind. And the last type we're going to talk about are the marrow. In Irish folklore, they're kind of described as sea fairies, and the word marrow essentially means sea maid. The marrow have both male and female figures, and the female are described kind of as our typical mermaid. They're beautiful and ethereal, but the men are described as being so ugly that the women often ignore them and seek out human lovers instead. The marrow women will lure human men with song and hold them against their will, bringing them to live under the water, being kept alive with different magical enchantments and charms. And if this human lover chooses to try to escape from the marrow, they are said to become quite murderous and will eat her lover, and they will also cause fatal storms up at the surface. I truly feel like all over the world, mermaids are extremely popular. Actually, I was thinking that, so I live in Maine, and seals are really big here, and I was thinking, like, maybe we have Selkies here, and we just don't really know it because they're just acting like people or seals. Just a thought. Anyway, before I wrap up, I want to talk about the story we all know called The Little Mermaid. This tale and this depiction really, I think, became popularized because of Disney, and this ultimately made mermaids seem kind of for children or family friendly, but as we just talked about, that isn't necessarily always true. And if you don't know, most fairy tales have very, very dark origins in the story, or are just significantly darker than the way they've been portrayed to us in our time. So I kind of want to talk about the original tale of The Little Mermaid and its darker roots. The story was written by Hans Christian Andersen in 1837 in Copenhagen, Denmark. And of course there are similarities to the Disney adaptation, but some of the most notable differences are that the mermaid princess doesn't just lose her voice, she loses her tongue in order to gain legs. But once she's on shore, walking on those legs, she is described to be in severe pain, that of which is like walking on knives. This mermaid princess also does not break her curse, and unfortunately her human prince marries somebody else, which then leads the mermaid princess to sacrifice herself. Sad. Now, to kind of account for something I said earlier, that there's been no truly confirmed real sightings of mermaids, you may or may not have heard of the Fiji mermaid. If you have or you haven't, I think when the image came out, it was super popular and people were really truly believing that it was a true mummified real mermaid. But I guess unfortunately, there's a little tiny spider. Hi, spider. Anyway, but the Fiji mermaid was debunked as a myth. I feel like this is kind of grim and sad, but the body is said to be the torso of a juvenile or young monkey sewn together with a kind of middle body half to tail section of a fish. I do want to say just kind of like my belief on like maybe that they are real is like the depths of the ocean are crazy and there are some wild creatures down there. Like The rabbit hole of deep sea creatures, scary. I don't like them. Those are aliens. But so like why couldn't there be mermaids hanging out? And they just haven't really chosen to come up. And maybe since people believe that the people who have seen mermaids are just drunk, mistaking known creatures, how do we actually know? How do we know that they didn't see them? I mean, maybe they're drunk, but I don't know. I've got thoughts. That's really it for the folklore of the mermaid. There's just so much like rich individual cultural folklore and history that this video could probably go on forever and ever. But yeah, the merfolk have complex histories and personalities. You know, they can be benevolent and symbols of luck, or they can kill you, or be the sign of disaster. But so thank you so much for joining me on the folklore of mermaids. And to kind of side note really quick, it was brief, but I enjoyed talking about the dark origins of the fairy tale, and I'm wondering if that can kind of count as a folklore video of itself, that like maybe I talk about the dark truths behind popular fairy tales, because fairy tales are just folklore, so why not? I probably will. Honestly, that sounds really fun. That's all I have, but thank you for joining me today to hear about the folklore of mermaids. I appreciate you being here, and please like and subscribe if you like folky stories. And I think that's all I really have to say. I look forward to seeing you next week, and can't wait to see what else we learn. Here, wait, a little baby's here. Here's Lint. Lint and I and Opal, who was made a feature this morning, say thank you, and we will see you all later. Bye!